Good evening. It is 2 days after the twin bombings rocked Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. The country is coming to terms with the death and devastation. The number of those dead has risen to more than 300. Rescue workers say that number is expected to rise further. 15 children are among those dead in what has been described as the deadliest bomb attack in Somalia so far. So who is behind the attack? And what's next for Somalia? And what does this mean for Kenya? We answer these questions on The Big Story tonight. Welcome to our program. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. We'll be attempting to speak to a number of analysts on this issue, as well as speaking to those within Somalia in the capital, Mogadishu. Tonight, I have with me the Horn of Africa specialist Abdul Samad Abdullahi, as well as security analyst Simiyu Werunga, who join me tonight on the show. We will also be speaking to a Kenyan journalist in Somalia, Dominic Tomno, who will be joining us via Skype in just a moment to just get his reactions, where he was, and to paint the picture for us as to just what is happening right now with the efforts as they continue. Welcome to our program, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with me tonight. I think I'd like to start with you, Sheikh. Perhaps you can tell us your reaction to this one. It is interesting that 2 days later, there has been no claim of responsibility. Does this sound familiar at all? Usually, Al-Shabaab will claim responsibility almost immediately.
And Yvonne, this is the deadliest incident I ever witnessed since the collapse of the central government 27 years ago. It's a clear signal that, Al-Shabaab is not down and out. In fact, they are escalating the war. Just last Saturday, they take over the town of Berire, almost 50 kilometers from Mogadishu. That's why, if this attack could backfire on Al-Shabaab if they claim responsibility, because the level of the destruction and the level of the bombings, in fact, is beyond the imaginations. In fact, it's almost, cost more than 200 people, and just more than 1,000 people. Rescue workers now, they're pulling, out the bodies and the rubble. That's why exactly, if they claim the responsibility, they can easily lose the hearts and the minds of the Somali community. And this, attack came after 2 days of the unexpected resignation, of Muhammad, Abdul Rashid Abdullahi Muhammad, the defense minister, and also chief of general staff, Muhammad Ahmed Jimale. Both of them, in fact, they are an expert of, containing Al-Shabaab in Mogadishu. Unfortunately, they resigned just 2 days after this attack. Also, it's, if you look at the U.S. Special Forces have conducted more than 15 airstrikes within this year. 5 of them, in fact, it was last month, which also, if you look at, the latest strike on July 30th, the American Special Forces, they killed Ali Jebel, one of the Al-Shabaab commanders, who also conducted attack in Mogadishu and elsewhere in Somalia. And those, in fact, if you add together, they have a tremendous pressure under what they call under American Special Forces, together with Somali Army Forces. Although the Somali National Army are factionalized along the clan lines, and also they don't have a central command. That's also hindered the development or containing Al-Shabaab itself. Okay, all right, and we'll come and talk about that. But it's also interesting that you mention that if Al-Shabaab were to claim responsibility, that this could backfire on them. And we did see, many residents in the capital protesting against this attack, and decrying the sheer violence that we've seen, of that so far. So that might tie into what you were saying about this just going against the tide if they were looking for any support whatsoever within Somalia. Even to be honest with you, if you look at the level of destruction, many, in my imagination, they got an assistance from Al-Qaeda in Yemen, because if you look at the kind of destruction, the level of the magnitude of the destruction is beyond the imaginations. That's why they couldn't even expect themselves, the level of destruction. If they claim right now the responsibility, they can easily backfire on them. Because many Somalis, they believe that, You know, honestly speaking, it's beyond my imagination. So that's why they can easily lose the support from the grassroots.
Okay.
That's why they kept quiet and they don't want to claim any responsibility at all.
All right, yeah, interesting perspective. Simiyu, do you share the same? I mean, you know, we're hearing this is destruction beyond imagination. This is the most devastating, you know, attack that we've seen in Somalia so far. What are your thoughts as to responsibility? And we'll get into clan issues in just a moment and the effect on Kenya. But I'd just like your first reactions to what we're seeing out of Mogadishu so far.
Yeah, I think to some extent, yes, I agree with my friend and colleague. But one thing we need to understand that in every kind of insurgency or terror activities, there's something we call a defining moment. And I think the destruction, the loss of life that has occurred to the people of Mogadishu could be a defining moment for Al-Shabaab in Somalia.
Defining in what way, Simiyu?
In a way that the thinking and the support from the people that have been supporting them, the financiers that have been supporting Al-Shabaab, could just be the changing moment for them, because the destruction, the magnitude, and the toll of those affected, those who are injured, those who have died, the destruction of property is in such a level that has not been seen anywhere since Al-Shabaab took over certain parts of Somalia. So to a moment, I think I agree that this could be their defining moment. Somalia people, or the Somali people in Somalia, I'm sure are now thinking how we need to deal with this thing as a national scourge. And therefore, this could have a serious negative impact on Al-Shabaab, because you realize that the death toll is in such a way that it took people who are doing their businesses in the middle of Mogadishu. Intersection K5 is a very busy intersection in Somalia. Medina is a business area of Mogadishu, and they chose to destroy those areas that people of Mogadishu have been seeing as the hallmark of renewal of the Somalia nation. And therefore, it's going to be very difficult for the Al-Qaeda people to justify what they've done in Mogadishu. Number two, we need to understand that Al-Shabaab has also been divided into small segments, some being supported by ISIS, others being supported by the main Al-Qaeda, and of course we have that other group that has local support. So it might be difficult for any of those to come out now and claim responsibility because of the sheer destruction that we've seen in this.
Okay, I'll also be speaking to Ambassador Martin Kimani, who's joining us on the phone in just a moment. But Simiyu, I'd like to ask you this. We've been hearing quite a bit from leaders and those in the know with the security situation in the Horn of Africa that, you know, Al-Shabaab is now on the run. They're desperate. You know, they've been flushed out of many of their strongholds. But this attack is certainly not one. It doesn't look like from persons who are desperate. And Abdi Wahab talked about the fact that they could have gotten support for this attack from the group in Yemen. But this certainly isn't the work of a group that's desperate and running for their lives and trying to scramble together after AMISOM has managed to flush them out.
You know, there's a problem, Yvonne, about how we want to classify these kind of things. For a long time, we've been saying Al-Shabaab is morphing into an insurgency, and some of these people don't want to agree. For some reasons I do not understand. What we are noticing, and that is the extension we are seeing even in Lamu, is that Al-Shabaab is changing its tactics from a complete terror organization into an insurgency. A low-level insurgency are some of the things we are seeing now.
All right, Simiyu, for the sake of our viewers, what would be the difference now that you're saying they're moving into a low-level insurgency? What would that mean exactly?
The difference between terrorism and insurgency is that within an insurgency framework, you are trying to create space so that you carve out a space for yourself and you give the government difficulties to manage or have access to that space. In our security language, we call that distant decay. When you push the government to move from areas that they are supposed to control and you leave it to the Al-Shabaab to be in charge, then the government is slowly distancing itself from areas within its territorial boundaries that are supposed to be in charge. And what Al-Shabaab is doing, unfortunately, with the people of Mogadishu, they are trying to ensure that the Federal Republic government of Somalia does not claim to be in charge completely of Mogadishu as a city. What happens with that? It means people will not be sure anymore that the federal government of Somalia can guarantee their security. And in the process, therefore, Al-Shabaab can start having a reign of itself within certain parts of Mogadishu, and that's what we call distant decay. Pushing out government forces, pushing out government responsibility, and taking charge, whether directly or indirectly, but creating a space for themselves so that they have the capacity to manage, they have the capacity to organize, they have the capacity to extort.
Okay.
That is the difference between insurgency and terrorism.
All right, yeah, interesting for us to understand this issue because it is rather complex. But let's also speak on phone to Ambassador Martin Kimani, who's Kenya's Special Envoy to Countering Violent Extremism, the Director of the National Counter-Terrorism Center here in the country. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on phone. First of all, your reaction to this attack and you know, what this means, especially with the war on terror in which Kenya is heavily involved in this part of the world.
Thank you, Yvonne. I want to express our very strong condemnation for this terrible cruelty that has been visited on the people of Somalia. Our hearts are with them. We condole with them. And we can only relate, and we relate deeply with the injuries and suffering that they're going through. And that is part of the reason why I am personally very proud that our forces are part of the AMISOM mission and that we are staying the course on stabilizing Somalia and ensuring that Al-Shabaab continues to be under attack by the international community.
Talk to us about Al-Shabaab. I mean, they haven't claimed responsibility, but, you know, we are here with analysts speaking about this possibly being their work, including the president of Somalia, President Mohamed Farmajo, who, you know, is certain that this is Al-Shabaab. What are your thoughts as to that? Do you think this is Al-Shabaab? And what does this say exactly, being one of the deadliest attacks we've seen in Somalia in recent times? Abdul Wahab is calling it, you know, sheer terror and the sheer devastation with this attack. So what does this tell you about Al-Shabaab in terms of, you know, their strength? Are they morphing into something different than what we've known?
No, I don't think so. First of all, terrorist organizations, even when they're at their weakest, are still able to perpetrate attacks that claim a lot of innocent lives. You only have to remember ISIS in Syria and Iraq, even as it has lost ground, has continued to exact a very heavy toll on the forces that were fighting it and on civilian populations. I heard Mr. Simiyu talking about low-level insurgency versus terrorism. These are very technical terms, but ultimately there's not much difference between these terms. Terrorism is nothing but a tactic, as is insurgent methods that are used by a wide variety of non-state groups. I think the thing for our listeners and fellow Kenyans to keep their minds on is, one, we are dealing with an enemy whose ideas and idea of morality means that they will never stop unless we put them out of commission. So we have to stay the course, and we have to continue fighting them as part of a united front.
Okay, what does this say about them now that, you know, it seems they're able to carry out an attack of such magnitude? Are they receiving help? And what now would be the counter strategy, you know, towards taming Al-Shabaab? Because, you know, this is on a scale that has not been seen before in Somalia, at least. What do you think this says, considering that AMISOM troops continue to have presence in Somalia and continue to fight the insurgency?
It says that a terrorist organization was able to sneak a truck into the center of a busy, populated space. It does not say anything more about their deeper long-term capabilities. Al-Shabaab and other terrorist groups are able to carry out these kinds of attacks on soft targets. I think, Yvonne, one of the more important issues is not what it says about them, but what should we say about ourselves? And right now, we are spending a lot of time policing against riots in different parts of Kenya, when our security forces should be concentrated all their attention on preventing attacks from Al-Shabaab and other terrorist organizations.
All right, that's interesting. Please stay with me, Ambassador Martin Kimani, on the phone, because I'd like to listen to what Abdul Wahab has to say. You know, he says, Ambassador Kimani says it should say something about us and where our focus is, and that our security forces should continue, you know, to focus on prevention. Do you think we're doing enough in this country? I mean, there's what's happening with the operation in Boni Forest, you know, in Lamu area, as well as what's happening with AMISOM, you know, inside Somalia. What do you think this says about Al-Shabaab, about the operation inside Somalia?
And Yvonne, let's say something about this issue. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, mainly, they are driven by the economic issues, while the Al-Shabaab in Kenya is driven by the ideologies. There's a difference between the two. Large number of Al-Shabaab inside Somalia is driven by the economy, because the country, for the last 27 years, has no functional central government. A large number of the youth are jobless. So the only source of income is to join Al-Shabaab and get something out of it. Contrary to Kenyan, you know, section of Al-Shabaab, which is based, you know, driven by the ideologies. Ideology, you know, you can kill someone in less than 5 minutes, but you cannot kill an ideology. It will take years and years to come. The other issue I'm going to mention here is, you know, Al-Shabaab also, they took advantage of division between the central government of Somalia and also regional member states. You know, in the Gulf crisis being a source of conflict, because most of the regional states, they sided with Saudi bloc. Unlike, you know, the central government, which, you know, they claim they are neutral about this issue. So that division itself has created a vacuum, security vacuum. That's why they're sending a signal, Al-Shabaab is not down and out. They are here. That's why, if you look at, for the last Sunday, they have taken over 50 kilometers, you know, town called Baride, 50 kilometers from Mogadishu. And if you look at how the American special forces, you know, are conducting what they call airstrikes against Al-Shabaab, together with Somali armed forces. As I told you earlier, Somali armed forces are functionalized along the clan lines. That's why they don't have a central command. The large number of Somali analysts, Somali researchers are saying, and I think it's better to train the Somali armed forces a single friendly state, be it USA or Turkey, which has a central command and capacity control. If they fail to do that, then to contain Al-Shabaab, it will take years to come. That's why, you know, African Peacekeeping Force, they are there for the last 10 years. The mandate of African Peacekeeping Force was to train and equip the Somali armed forces. Unfortunately, 10 years down the line, still Al-Shabaab is a level to the entire region. That's what I'm saying. Active Al-Shabaab cannot afford, you know, regional cannot afford to have active Al-Shabaab inside Somalia. It can easily destabilize the entire region. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. If you look at Yemen, which is also the other side of the border of Somalia, Yemen 5 years ago was a country which is stable. Today, they go into Somali way. That's what I'm saying. If they don't contain and defeat Al-Shabaab, African Peacekeeping Force, that will create another havoc in the entire region. You know, staying in Somalia, you cannot stay in Somalia indefinitely, for sure. How long the international community can support you? The sooner they defeat Al-Shabaab or contain Al-Shabaab, the better for the African Union Peacekeeping Force. Okay. Yvonne, I'm going to add one point. Yes. This hateful ideology has nothing to do with Islam. Honestly speaking, the majority of Somalis, the majority of Muslim societies are against this hateful, you know, ideology. That's why, up to now, the last incident, they failed to claim the responsibility because they can easily lose the support of Somali community and region as well.
All right, Abdul Wahab, we hear you on that. Ambassador Kimani, if you're still on the line with me, I'd like you to react to some of the issues that Abdul Wahab is bringing up, including the tribal and clan issues within Somalia, and, you know, what the strategy would be towards, you know, having that sorted out, because clearly that is another factor in this war against terror, and just how we go about countering an ideology, because, you know, like they say, you can kill one man, but killing an ideology is something that takes, you know, a lot more time. So how do we factor in the tribe and clan issue in this war on terror, and how do we then start to counter the ideology? What are some of those tangible steps that we can start to work towards?
Thank you. First of all, Yvonne, thank you for bringing such a thoughtful panel of people together, and I really appreciate the previous speaker's perspective. When we speak about the ideology, I think the Kenyan government has been building a preventive capability that we're continually building. It's not where it should be ideally, but we're continually building it, and I think we are one of the few countries in the region, and I think in the world, has invested so aggressively on prevention and trying to engage the community more. We have a lot more work to do, but we're trying our best. I'll just make two quick points. One, on the issue of ideology. Beyond talking about what the ideology is, we first have to ask, what are the people in that market, almost 500 of whom were injured or killed, do to deserve the violence that was done to them? And of course, the answer is nothing. And the point is the ideology or the ideas or the ideals of Al-Shabaab and other terrorist groups demand that they continually assault other people so as to impose their vision on them. So the idea that I've heard, that if Kenya were not in Somalia, if Kenya were not fighting these groups, that they would leave us alone, is one of the great illusions of our time. And towards that end, when you ask what should be the strategy, prevention, counter-radicalization, counter-narratives, these are tactics. The real strategy is for Kenya to come together as a country to fight these groups. And right now, within the political class, we do not have consensus on this. We have heard senior politicians, especially from NASA, including Honorable Raila Odinga, calling for us to withdraw from Somalia. I think the beginning of a strategy is for them to take back that stance after this outrage in Mogadishu. I think the international community would appreciate to hear them say strongly and unequivocally that Kenya is going to fight this enemy until we prevail. We cannot have a divided country when it comes to terrorism.
Okay.
And finally, I think this is a time for us to understand that Al-Shabaab and these groups are going to continue exacting a human toll. Just because they kill people in Mogadishu does not mean the Somali government is failing to fight them effectively. Just because they are able to attack and behead an innocent villager does not mean the Kenyan government is not fighting them as hard as it could. We have to toughen up and bring our political actors together so that they do not politicize the fight against this evil. All right,
okay, yeah. Interesting point, an important one to note as well. Gentlemen, I'd like you to stay with me on the big story. We're going to continue to discuss this on the show in just a few minutes. I'm still with Ambassador Martin Kimani, who's a special envoy countering violent extremism. We also have Simiyu Arunga, who's a security analyst, as well as Abdul Wahab Abdul Samad, who is a Horn of Africa specialist. We're continuing to have this conversation. Gentlemen, stay with me. When we return, I'd like to talk about Turkey's military base that was recently opened in Mogadishu, the help that they've been providing and what this says, because there's been a lot that's been happening in Mogadishu before this attack, a lot of growth, a lot of development, a lot of trade that's taking place, as well as the international reaction. Why we haven't seen Je suis Mogadishu, for example. We'll be discussing that and much more when we return here on The Big Story.